Richplanet TV is sponsored by PrepperSafeHomes.co.uk. At last, home protection that really works.
So people say, well, surely the answer to this information problem that we're not being given the truth is the internet. And I do think we have to protect the freedoms of the internet, but I'm just going to point out where people are getting their information from on the internet. My website gets about 1,700 visitors a day. That's about 50,000 a month. Now, other websites, such as, say, the David Icke website, would get a lot more visitors per day than me, right? But let's just compare my website with mainstream. The Mail Online hits 56 million web users. This is from 2011. Mail Online expanded its lead on other UK national newspaper websites in January, pulling in a monthly total of 56 million users, according to the latest report. Average daily browsers 3.1 million, The Guardian 2.3 million, The Independent 5.6 million. So for every person looking at my website each day, there's 1,850 looking at Mail Online website. And if you factor in the BBC website and the other mainstream websites, it's well over 5,000. So for every person going on independent media, there's 5,000. They're still staying on mainstream sources, even though they're going to the internet. And this is because they've pumped so much money into it. The BBC spends £145 million a year just on its website. That's not on TV, just on its website. That's nearly £400,000 a day. How can somebody like me or other independent media organisations compete with that? So they've still got people's minds locked into the mainstream propaganda. Now, another very important arm of their propaganda is print media. And of course, it will be impossible for me to have, on the end, you go into the newsagents, to have Richplanet News here. How could you possibly get that? They've got control of this. And it's probably one of the most entertaining parts of my day. I go in the co-op each morning and just stand in front of the newspaper stand. It's very entertaining. It's just hilarious what they come up with. But some people say that the headline is very important because that's what sells the newspaper. I don't actually agree with that, because I think that people who ultimately control newspapers, money is just a means to an end, as I will explain in a minute. And it's the information and control of people's minds that they're interested in. Because let's just say 2 million people buy that Mail newspaper. If 2 million people buy that, these are in such prominent positions in garage forecourts and in supermarkets that maybe over 10 million people will read the headline. Because you can buy a story without actually buying the newspaper. This is why I think the positioning of these newspaper racks of, as I say, newspapers are extremely important for their propaganda. And all they need to do on the front of the page is just put Islamic terror plot, and then that's gone straight in your subconscious. So I still think that the printed media is an extremely important wing of their propaganda. And how can an independent compete with that? How could anyone, unless they've got millions and millions of pounds, put a competing publication on there? Okay, so people say to me, why don't you get Richplanet on mainstream? We want to see you on mainstream TV. Well, I'd love to, but there's an overriding problem. I have been contacted by 2 or 3. Discovery Channel wanted to make a UFO thing. ITN contacted me. There was the road trip, UFO road trip. They contacted me. I just ignored them. But what has happened is I'll say to them, well, can I see a copy of your program proposal that you want me to take part in? And I want to see the finished piece before it goes out. I want to have a final say. And they'll just say, oh, well, we don't do that. That's not how we work. And I'll say, well, F off, rouse. What, you're just going to take my stuff, mess with it, and put it out and make a fool of me, and not let me see the finished thing? That's how they operate, though. And they've done that with lots of people that I know who've got involved in mainstream documentaries. Everyone who I know has regretted it, right? So hence I've never got involved, and this is the problem. If someone on my show says to me, Richard, can I see what you're going to put out? I'll give them a copy of it. I'll say, yeah, sure. And if they're not happy with part of it or all of it, I'll say, well, what aren't you happy with? And then we'll have a discussion. I'll say, yeah, okay, you've got a point there. I'll edit that bit or change this. So I'm quite happy. But generally that's not necessary, because I just put out whatever it is that they're saying. I don't mess with it. I'm trying to report the truth. But they have this policy in mainstream that they will not let anyone see a finished program, because they're worried that the person will start taking control of it. But to me, they should do that. Okay. Now, one thing that they use in the mainstream, I call it the phony bone of contention in order to spin their lies. And I've actually come up with a couple of definitions for the phony bone of contention. Controversy and discussion over two seemingly opposing viewpoints is encouraged in order to divert attention away from a third viewpoint which is being concealed. Okay, and I'm going to give an example of this. The other flavour of the phony bone of contention is that controversy and discussion over two seemingly opposing viewpoints is encouraged in order to reinforce credibility of a subtextual issue which is itself a fake construct. So we're seeing this second one in 7-7 all the time. There's lots of stories that have 7-7 as the subtext, but they're not specifically talking about 7-7 or the evidence. So an example would be Lisa French has started campaigning against mental health cutbacks. She was on the bus that blew up in 7-7 and had treatment for her post-traumatic stress disorder. So she's saying, isn't it terrible that the government are cutting back? So they've created contention about government cutbacks, and they're constantly reminding people 7-7 was done by terrorists by having her on the news, but without actually having to be challenged on the evidence of that. And there's been loads of stories about 7-7 that aren't discussing the evidence, but there's some other issue that they're reminding people that 7-7 was a real event when actually it was a fake construct. So the first one, one program which makes very good use of the phony bone of contention is Question Time, or questionable Time, with the completely disgusting David Dimbleby. He's not there chairing an open and honest debate. He is there to make sure that the phony issues are stayed on. He's there to make sure that the real answers are not discussed. So I've got an example here of a question from Question Time. So let's just have a look at this question.
Thank you. Our first question is from Lindsay Johnson, please.
Should we applaud the Chancellor for his steadfastness, or should we decry him for his stubbornness?
Good question.
Is it? Let's just have a look at it. Should we applaud the Chancellor for his steadfastness, or should we decry him for his stubbornness? Now, that question's been flowered up a little bit, but I'm going to explain exactly what the questioner means. By steadfastness, they mean austerity measures, because the Chancellor is supposedly introducing austerity, so he's increasing taxes and he's cutting back on government spending. So that's what they mean by steadfastness, austerity measures. Decry him for his stubbornness, what that means is some people are wanting him to borrow more money and inject that into the economy in order to try and stimulate growth. So he's being stubborn because he's refusing to borrow more money. And that's it. They're the only two solutions to the economy that they're going to have in that discussion. They're going to have austerity measures or more borrowing. Which do you want? Which do you want to choose? You can have austerity measures or borrowing, and that's your lot. You can't have any more debate about other solutions to the economic problems. What should the questioner have asked if this was a proper debate? How about, what does the panel think could be done to address the current financial situation? The original question limits the debate to two possible alternatives, neither of which provide a real solution to the problem. Austerity measures bleed you dry. More borrowing just gets you further into debt. Neither of those are solutions to the economic problems, in my opinion. I'll just give you a simple analogy. It's not a perfect one, but it's the best I could think of. Let's say I'm a taxi driver, and my car's only getting 10 miles to the gallon, right? But I work out that I'm still making a profit. So I think to myself, right, I know what I'll do. I can work 18 hours a day, and I'll just make enough to live. And I think, no, what I'll do is I'll just work on Sundays, but I'll work 24 hours a day because I get double time. And I'll make more on a Sunday. And they're the two options. And I ponder over them and argue over them. What's the real solution? The real solution is to get rid of the car, get a new taxi. And it's the same with the economy. The economic issues are systemic. They're system problems. They're a problem with the current system. So you can't solve them by pumping money in or borrowing money or tax spend. It's a systemic problem which has been around for centuries. Okay? So what is being concealed in such a debate? Because this is what phony bones of contention do. They conceal the real solution. Okay. Now, the real solution to the economic issues is a lecture in itself. Okay. But just to summarise, to end fractional reserve banking and usury, and it will allow governments to issue currency debt-free. That's in a nutshell, okay? But they would never discuss that on a programme like Question Time. But there's actually a second thing which is being concealed. Because the solution is reasonably simple to the economic debt that we're in, right? It's written there, right? That leads you to another thing that they're concealing, which is that the debt isn't an accident. It's not an accident, in my opinion. It's been done deliberately. If you put someone in debt, whether it be a company or a country or an individual, you're not necessarily putting them in debt because you want that money back. You might be putting them in debt to permanently disempower them and control them, right? So I don't think the debt is an accident. I think it's a control mechanism. But they would never allow any individual on Question Time to actually express that view, because the people who ultimately control the banking system decide who gets on Question Time. Now, another thing that they keep going on about is we need, and all parties say this, all parties come up with this, even the Green Party. Economic growth is good and we need to try and increase GDP to get out of debt. Really? So we need to consume more stuff and that's going to get us out of debt? Does that sound right to you? It's a bit like saying if you have a company, because GDP is equivalent to turnover in a company, if you increase a company's turnover, will it automatically make more profit so it could pay off debt? Not necessarily. And there's another flaw in this argument, which is that, let's say that you did increase GDP, so you've got more wealth and you print more money to represent that wealth. Well, you can only use that money to pay off debt if the money is printed debt-free, so it doesn't have to be paid back. But when they issue it as a loan. So there's flaws in this statement. But again, there's something a lot more sinister behind this statement, and it was pointed out by Zbigniew Brzezinski in his 1969 book, Between Two Ages. Now, this guy is still an advisor to Barack Obama, and he's been an advisor to other American presidents. And in '69 he said, "The challenge for governments in the future will be to prevent man from effectively discovering his true self and keeping humanity locked into consumerist materialism." What the flippin' heck is he talking about? Preventing man from effectively discovering his true self. Well, I'm going to try and explain what Brzezinski's talking about with an economics lesson. But it's an economics lesson you will not see in any school, because it's an economics lesson without reference to the word money. Okay? Because money is just a means to an end. Money is like the oil in an engine. It goes round and round and round and round. If you're just watching the oil in an engine, you don't know where the car's going. You don't know the purpose of the journey or the agenda for that journey. That's all money is. It's a means to an end. So remove money out of the equation, and then let's have a look at the economics. Okay, what's more important than money in an economy? Well, I would suggest time is very important. This blue bar represents the amount of time that you've got in any one particular week. So you can split that up into your work time and your free time. Now, what else is important in an economy? Well, I've just called it stuff. Okay, you go to work to get your stuff. Alright? Now, we can split stuff up into stuff that you need and stuff that you want. Stuff that you need is stuff that if you didn't have, you might die. So food, clean water, shelter, clothing perhaps. Stuff that you want is all of the luxury goods that we love and crave. iPads, fast cars, you name it. Sky football, the list is endless and growing. Now, you can split work up into the amount of time it would take you to get the stuff that you need and the amount of time it would take you to work to get the stuff that you want. Alright? I've also split the free time up into consumption, because if we're consuming all of this stuff, we need time to consume it. We need time to watch our Sky football or whatever it is that we're doing. And then there's our free time. This is very important. Free time where you will learn, or you will become political, or you will be critical. This is where you'll, as Brzezinski says, discover who you truly are. Now, let's go back 600 years and draw the chart for a typical person, because it would look very different to that. And just to point out that in the modern age, really, probably only 10% of our time is actually spent working for the stuff that we need. If you actually list all of the products consumed in any one year, less than 10% are stuff that keep you alive. Okay, so let's go back before the Industrial Revolution. It's going to look more like this. So the vast majority of people's time will be spent to get the stuff that they need to live, and they would spend very little time actually on luxury goods. So let's just say we could go back in time and speak to them. and we say to them, hey, it's great in the future because we only spend 10% of our time to get all the stuff that we need. And the person in the past would say, really? Must be great in the future. You must have loads of free time on your hand. And we'd scratch our head and say, well, no, we haven't actually. Why is that? Strange. Well, it's because the stuff that we want has been mushroomed out of all proportion. Needs have been created which didn't exist in the past. All of the consumption that we have that isn't really necessary. I was in a shop the other day and I said to the woman behind the counter, this shop should be called Things I Can Live Without. It wasn't my idea to go in the shop, by the way. I was dragged there. Anyway, so this is what Brzezinski's talking about, because what Brzezinski sees as the threat is he doesn't want this box to grow, because if you spend less time working, you're going to have lots of free time on your hand to discover who you truly are. So he says, let's keep everyone running around, working, and in order to do that, we need to keep them consuming. All right? Now, just a word about debt. Debt occurs in our model here when the amount of things that you want exceeds the amount of work time required to obtain it. And a lot of people fall into personal debt. It's so easy these days. And getting someone in personal debt is a great way of keeping them, as Zabinski says, locked into consumerist materialism. Now, a lot of people would say, yeah, and this is what marketing has done. This is sales and marketing that make people want things that they don't really need. Maybe. Bill Hicks once said, anyone here working sales and marketing? Kill yourself. I would only partly agree with him, because I actually think the way marketing works is that it makes people feel dissatisfied with the amount and value of stuff that they have, yeah? So that they want something better. I would argue that practically every show on TV does that. They don't need marketing. It makes you feel dissatisfied with your house. That's what TV does. It makes you feel dissatisfied with what's in your house. It makes you feel dissatisfied with the car that you drive. It makes you feel dissatisfied with the food that you eat. It makes you feel dissatisfied that you're not a pop star. It makes you feel dissatisfied you're not an executive. It makes you feel dissatisfied you're not an entrepreneur. How many programs on TV actually work on making you feel content with what you can realistically achieve and celebrating that? I can't think of any. They all psychologically make you want more. And this is what Zbigniew Brzezinski was talking about. So, the statement that all political parties come out with, economic growth is good and we should all try and increase GDP, really? Really? If you want to permanently enslave yourself purely for the purposes of unbridled consumption, then that statement is true. But I don't want to do that, because I want some free time to discover who I truly am. Now, you might be sitting there a bit smug saying, well, he's not talking about me here because I haven't got any debt. I live well within my means. Well, they've thought about people like you. Because there are 30 million taxpayers in the UK. And the current debt, took me a while to get these notes right, the current government debt is 1.4 trillion. Now, that's a bit of a misnomer, government debt. What that is taxpayer debt. Because the government's going to get it from taxpayers. UK taxpayer debt is 1.4 trillion. So if you divide 30 million into 1.4 trillion, you get just under £47,000 each. Right? So that's debt. That's your debt that the government's holding on your behalf. Right? So if you haven't got that much spare, then you're in debt as well. And remember, it's not an accident. In my opinion, it's not an accident. It's a control mechanism. So why are they doing this? Why are they pushing national governments? And all national governments seem to have debt. Personal debt, I think it's a control mechanism. I don't like to try and predict what they're trying to do, because they don't invite me to their tea parties, right? These people who orchestrate this. But I'm pretty certain that it is orchestrated, it's deliberate. We might see whole countries going bankrupt so that they can then be taken into a more central political structure, the New World Order that people talk about. That's perhaps what's going on here. But as I say, you won't see someone on Question Time actually make the statement that it's all deliberate. It's not accidental economic cycles that create the debt. I don't buy that for 1 second.
Richplanet TV is sponsored by preppersafehomes.co.uk. InstaShield, protecting your most valuable assets.